The sun dipped lower over Dodge City, the sky painted in copper and blood-red streaks, casting long shadows over the dirt road that cut through the heart of town. Dust swirled in the air with each step of weary horses and boots. The saloon doors swung lazily as the piano inside stumbled through a tune no one really cared to listen to. Men leaned on wooden rails, spitting tobacco into the street, watching life crawl by with the suspicion of those who'd seen too much of it already. The frontier was a place where eyes told stories faster than mouths dared to, and tonight, every glance carried a warning. James Calder guided his chestnut mare slowly down the main street. He wasn't a lawman, nor a gambler, nor a gunslinger who carried stories stitched into his reputation. He was a rancher, a man whose days were carved out by sweat, dirt, and the rhythm of cattle. James was the kind of man who preferred silence to conversation, who found comfort in the steady creak of saddle leather and the endless horizon that stretched across Kansas land. He came to Dodge City only when necessity dragged him supplies, tools, salt for the livestock, maybe a drink to dull the loneliness of the nights back at the ranch grew too heavy. But the frontier has a way of pulling even the quietest souls into storms. That's when he saw her. At first, she was only a shape at the edge of the boardwalk, standing half in shadow, half in the fading light. She wore a faded dress, the hem torn, streaks of dirt marking where she had stumbled through the streets. Her hair, once pinned with care, now fell loose and tangled around her face. But it was her eyes that caught him, wide, panicked, trembling with a desperation that was raw and unhidden. When she saw James, her lips parted, and before the rest of the town even registered her presence, her words cut through the air. "Please, broken bar, take me with you." The street froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A man dropped his drink off the saloon railing, and the crash of glass against the dirt seemed too loud in the silence that followed. Dodge City had seen many things: gunfights, brawls, outlaws hung by sunrise, but this moment carried something different, something heavier. A plea, spoken not in anger or bargaining, but in raw survival. James shifted in the saddle, uncertain. He wasn't a man who went looking for trouble, but the kind of trouble that came with a woman's desperate cry never left quietly. He studied her face, and what he saw there wasn't just fear, it was hope. Hope so fragile it could break if he turned away. The crowd's attention shifted. People glanced past the woman, down the street, and then James saw them too. Two riders, coming slow, their horses kicking up lazy clouds of dust as if even the animals carried menace. Their hats sat low, their eyes sharp as blades, and the weight of their revolvers seemed heavier than the saddles they rested on. These weren't drifters. These were men who carried darkness with them. The woman trembled, stepping closer to James, her voice cracking again. "Please, don't leave me here." James could have ignored her. He could have tugged on the reins, nudged his horse toward the general store, let the town handle its own chaos. Dodge City was good at that, at turning its back when the wrong kind of men made their presence known. But something in her voice cut deeper than any blade. A man like James, who lived by himself, who woke to silence and slept to silence, knew what it meant to be abandoned by the world. And in her eyes, he saw that same loneliness, that same desperate fight to believe someone might still care. The riders drew closer, and the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. No one stepped forward. No one would. This was how the frontier worked. Townsfolk watched, prayed the storm would pass them by, and buried the pieces afterward. James exhaled slowly, his decision made not with words but with instinct. He leaned down, extended his calloused hand, and met her gaze. For a second, the whole town held its breath. Then she reached for him, fingers clutching his hand like a lifeline. With one sharp pull, he hoisted her up behind him onto the saddle. The gasp that ran through Dodge City wasn't from the woman, it was from the crowd. James Calder had just crossed an invisible line. The riders stopped in the middle of the street, their horses stamping the dirt, eyes narrowing at the rancher. One of them, broad-shouldered with a scar running from his ear to his jaw, spat into the dirt and called out, "That ain't your business, rancher. Hand her over, and we'll let you ride out with your hide still on." James didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking once toward the riders before turning forward. He nudged his horse gently. "Hold on," he muttered to the woman behind him. The mare lurched forward, hooves pounding against the dirt. Dust exploded in their wake as James urged their horse into a gallop. The woman clung to him, her breath ragged, her fingers gripping the fabric of his coat as if letting go meant death itself. Gunfire cracked behind them. The sharp pop of revolvers split the evening air, bullets slicing past, splintering wood, kicking dirt at their heels. Townsfolk dove for cover, windows slammed shut, and the chase ignited. James leaned low, the reins taut, guiding the horse down the narrow street and out into the open plains where the horizon stretched endless and wild. The riders followed, relentless, their curses carried on the wind, their gunfire chasing them like angry thunder. The woman buried her face against his back, her words shaking. "Don't let them take me. Please, don't let them." James didn't answer, but the fire in his chest spoke for him. This wasn't about being a hero. This wasn't about playing the part of some legend the saloons would sing about later. This was about doing the one thing too many men in Dodge City had forgotten: standing between cruelty and the defenseless. The chase tore across the open land, through patches of dry grass, over small ridges where the ground cracked under pounding hooves. James felt every muscle of the mare strain, the sweat running down her neck, her breath sharp and desperate. Still, he pushed, knowing the riders were trained for this, knowing they wouldn't give up easily. The woman's grip tightened as another shot rang out, close enough to sing past James's ear. He yanked the reins, pulling the horse sharply left, weaving between a cluster of rocks that offered brief cover. The riders adjusted, their shouts growing louder, closer. As darkness began to fall and the first stars pierced the deepening sky, James realized he couldn't outrun them forever. If he kept to the open plains, the riders would eventually wear him down, and the woman's plea would end in the kind of silence Dodge City had grown too used to burying. He needed something else. Up ahead, the faint silhouette of an abandoned cabin sat crooked against the horizon, its roof sagging, its walls leaning like tired shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was cover. He urged the mare toward it, every second narrowing the distance between life and death. The horse slid to a stop near the cabin, dust swirling around them. James swung down, pulling the woman with him. He shoved her toward the broken door. "Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you." She nodded, her eyes wide with terror, but she obeyed. The riders slowed as they approached, circling like wolves around wounded prey. One called out again, voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can hide in there, rancher? Ain't no place in Kansas far enough to keep her from us." James checked his revolver. 6 bullets. 2 riders. The math was thin, but it would have to do. He leaned against the splintered wall, steadying his breath, listening to the sound of hooves crunching over dirt. The woman crouched inside, her hands clasped tight, whispering prayers into the silence. James didn't know her story, didn't know why those men hunted her, but he knew one thing with certainty: she had begged him to take her with him, and he had said yes. That promise, made without words, was the only truth that mattered now. The night split open with gunfire once more, and the cabin walls shook as bullets tore through rotten wood. James fired back, each shot measured, each trigger pull steady. Sparks lit the darkness, horses reared, curses echoed across the plains. The standoff stretched long into the night, until the stars bore witness to something Dodge City would talk about for years to come: a rancher who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, choosing to stand when the easier path was to walk away. And it all began with one plea, whispered on the dusty streets of Dodge City. "Please, broken bar, take me with you."